Hey, Liam here from Digiwaza Multimedia. Thanks for joining me for this Blender 2.82 tutorial. In this short tutorial series, we're going to be talking about how to create an industrial bar stool within Blender. We'll then give it an ID map, and then we'll take it into Substance Painter to give it a cool texture set, and then we'll bring it back into Blender and show how we can photograph it in a scene. Okay, cool. Right now I have a UV image editor open up here in this window. I have this stool in an image editor. This is kind of the inspiration for this project. I'm not going to model it exactly like this. I'm going to modify some stuff. But I wanted to have this here for you to look at to see what kind of parts we have to create. I just got this off Google Image. I'm not sure who owns this image, so I can't provide a link for it. You can find it in Google Images, no problem, I'm sure, or find something similar to it. It's really just here for me to show you the parts we need to make. Okay, so we have a lot of modeling to do. Let's get to it. I'm going to delete this cube by hitting X, delete. Let's hit Shift A, and this time instead of a mesh, which is what I usually add, we're going to add a curve. We're going to add Bezier curve. And then we're going to rotate this so it stands up. So the first part we're modeling is the leg on the stool. So let's stand this curve up. So I'm going to hit R, Y, -90, and it's standing up now. Let's hit 1 on the numpad to go into front view. And then now I'm going to hit RZ -90 to get to where I can see it from the front. Okay, so it already has a kind of a sweep, kind of like one of our legs. Again, I'm not modeling this stool exactly. I want my stool to be a taller stool, a little more elegant lines on it than this one. Okay, so let's just get in here and see what happens when we go into edit mode. If we hit tab, we'll be in edit mode. If you're new, this is what a curve looks like. It has 2 main control points here. I'm not sure if these are called vertices or not. They look like vertices. I'm just calling them control points. And we can see that these arrows kind of indicate the direction that the curve is pointed, and each one of these little segments is where the bends can occur. Okay, so I'm just going to grab this bottom control point right here, and I'm going to change my cursor to individual origins. I was in practice there, and we'll get back to that here in just a second. Okay, so you should be able to just select this one, select your gizmo, and it should go here. You can also use GX as your command to move this. But selecting your gizmo and then selecting this control point will get you just where we are right here. Okay, so I'm just going to pull the x-axis arrow out here 5 grid squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that puts it 5 away from the center line. Now, in order to get this to straighten up a little bit, because it curves under here, which would probably make kind of a weak stool, I want to select this point right here. I'm going to left click it, and then I'm just going to move this arrow in until it stands up vertically, and we can use the grid to make sure it's straight up and down. Once we do that, we have our legs standing here. It's looking pretty good. Okay, so once we have a curve in our scene, if we come to our control panel over here, we can see that we now have this new control here. If I left click that, I'll get this menu. If I go down to the one that says geometry, it'll probably be closed up when you're looking at it. If I simply click on geometry, come down a little further to the one that says bevel, make sure you open it up. And then we're going to come down to the one that says depth, under bevel, under geometry. If we hover over depth, we can just sit here like this, hold down the shift key, left click, and move our mouse to the right. And we'll see that our curve starts getting some thickness. So this is beveling it, and this gives it a little bit of thickness. You pick whichever thickness you like. This is about what I'm going to go with. Okay, one last thing before we get out of this control panel, resolution. If I want this to be a higher polygon count with smoother lines, I can up this resolution. And then when we convert the mesh, it'll be a higher polygon mesh. If I want it to be lower, I can lower the resolution. And then when we convert it, it'll be a lower polygon mesh. I'm going to leave it at 4, and so that looks good. All right, so let's convert this mesh real quick. So if we hit Tab to go into object mode, right click, and then select Convert to Mesh. Now when we hit Tab to go into edit mode, we can see that we in fact have a mesh now, which is pretty cool. Oh, I don't know why I did that. I'm just trying to move around here. Okay, cool. All right, so now we want to select a line all the way down the middle here, a line of edges, in order to unwrap. In order to unwrap, we have to obviously be in edit mode, and we need to be in edge select mode. So let's select edge select. I'm going to put my seam down the middle on the inside. You always want to try to put it somewhere where it's not going to be seen as much. So I'm going to grab this edge by left clicking, and then I'm just going to go down as far as I can and control left click. And we can see that Control Z, it messed that up. So I'm going to just come down here. So just control and left click all the way down the object, and you'll see. And you saw that the mistake that I made, I was slightly off, and then it's going to try to go the shortest distance between those 2 points. And if you're off one side or the other, you saw what happened there. Okay, so now that I have all of those selected, we can unwrap. So the way we unwrap is we right click and we just simply mark seam. And now that whole edge that we selected now has a seam. If I hit A to select the entire object while in edit mode, hit U and then unwrap, we'll see that it unwrapped it here in our UV image editor. And this is a perfectly adequate unwrap for this, so we're going to just go with it. Okay, the next thing what we want to do is we want to smooth this out. So we're going to hit Tab to go into object mode, right click, shade smooth. Then we're going to come right over here to this option in our menu right here, Object Data Properties. If we click it, we'll get in here, and then we want to go to the one that says Normals. We'll simply click that open. We'll click Auto Smooth, and as I get in here a little bit, you can see that it actually brought back some of the geometry. If we come down to where it says Angle and simply move our mouse up just a little bit, we'll see it smooths out. And we're going to have to redo this a little bit once we join this object together. But for now, we're just going to go 1 degree over, and that'll smooth it out. Okay, cool. So to recap, we created this using a curve. We unwrapped it by marking a seam, and we got a proper UV, and then we gave it a smoothing operation with our auto smooth here. Okay, so now we're ready to duplicate this object. So I'm going to go into 7 for top view. And then, actually, let's go 1 for front view. Sorry about that. And then let's move our object out just a little bit. I'm going to move it about 1/2 of a grid square off center up here at the top. And then we want to change the pivot point to the 3D cursor so that everything we duplicate will rotate around the 3D cursor. So let's come up here to the pivot point selection, and let's pick 3D cursor. Okay. And while we're at it here, our origin point of this object is off. So let's right click, set origin, origin to geometry. And that puts the origin point of our object kind of in its midline. Okay, so with the pivot point, the 3D cursor, we're ready to rock. I'm going to go 7 on the numpad to see it from the top. With our leg selected, we can simply hit Shift D. It'll turn white, and then we can just simply left click it to leave it in place. And then we can hit RZ90, and it will automatically rotate it to the 90-degree point. Let's do it again. Shift D, left click, RZ90, and one more time. Shift D, left click, RZ90. Okay, so we've duplicated all of our legs. They've been unwrapped. They've been smoothed. That's the basic workflow of this project. Each part we make, we're going to model it, we're going to unwrap it, we're going to smooth it. And then once we smooth it, if we need more than one of those, then we can duplicate our objects with all of those attributes. Otherwise, you got to kind of go back in and redo all that stuff. So it's best to just do it to one object before you duplicate and go on. Okay, the next step is the foot. I'm going to hit Alt-A to deselect everything. I'm going to hit Shift-A, and this time we're going to add a mesh circle. Okay, I'm going to go tab into Edit mode, and we're going to go into Vertex Select mode. Now, you could have also hit 1 on the top of your keyboard. I'm going to scale this in just a little bit, bring this down. I don't want to make this too small right now because the smaller you make it, the harder it is to move around and look at it. So I'm going to leave it kind of big while we model it, but this is going to be one of the feet. You can't really see them in this picture, but most of these kind of stools have like these metal feet, and that's what we're going to make. Okay, so in edit mode with our circle selected in Vertex Select mode, I'm going to hit ES. Okay, and that brings up a good point. I'm going to hit Control Z. And the reason that happened is because our pivot point is still the 3D cursor. So let's go up to the top here to our pivot point selection, and let's pick individual origins. Okay, and we're back. All right, let's hit ES, and we'll bring this in just a little bit, and then I'm gonna hit F to fill. I'm gonna hit Alt left click to select this entire circle around here, and then I'm gonna hit ES and drag it out just slightly, just a touch. Then I'm gonna use the Z-axis arrow just to pull this up so there's a slight angle there. And then we're gonna hit EZ, bring this up, ES to scale this in just a little bit, EZ to bring this up just a little bit, and ES to bring this back out approximately even with the first one. It doesn't have to be perfect though. And then EZ to bring this up like so, and then ES to bring this in, and then we're just going to pick this up so that there's a slight angle, and then EZ to bring that straight up like so. Okay, cool. Hopefully that wasn't too fast for you. It's just extruding and scaling is what allows us to move that in and out like we did. It's a pretty basic modeling technique. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go into edge select mode because we need to unwrap this now. Come up to the top, edge select here while in edit. And let's select this edge right here by hitting Alt left click. And we can select that entire section, that entire edge loop, right click, mark seam. Okay, now we need a cross section going down this way. I'm going to select this edge here, and then I'm going to follow it all the way down until I get to this red line, and then I'm going to hit Control left click so that I've selected the entire thing. Once I have that collected, I'm going to hit right click and mark seam. Okay, so that's ready to unwrap. Let's unwrap it by hitting A to make sure it's all selected, then hit U and unwrap. And here's what our unwrap looks like. Now sometimes if this was a big object we were going to see and it was the main part of our model, a curve like this might cause us problems with our texture set. In this case it's not going to, so I'm going to just leave it like this. I think it looks pretty good. Okay, cool. Next step in our workflow, of course, is to smooth it. We're going to hit Tab to go into object mode. We're going to right click and we're going to shade smooth. Now it looks kind of funky, so we're going to come right over here to our object data properties. Under normals, remember, we're going to hit auto smooth. It's probably still there from last time. And then we're going to change the angle just a little bit. In fact, I'm just going to leave it at 30. I think it's fine. And again, once we join this entire object together, we're going to have to mess with this smoothing group for the entire object. So it's not that important. So we'll auto smooth and leave it at 30. Okay, cool. Let's position the foot for duplication. So we've modeled it, we unwrapped it, we smoothed it. That's our the way we're operating here. I'm going to hit 1 on the numpad, and then I'm going to just tab into edit mode, so we're scaling in edit mode. And then I'm going to scale this down like so till it looks about the right size. I'm going to bring it down like so, and then I'm going to bring it over here to this other foot, and we can see it kind of goes right in there. And then we may need to scale it down just a little bit more. Okay, before we duplicate, we do have to come in here and look to make sure that it's looking good. So just kind of look at it from all angles and make sure it looks pretty good. I'm going to pull it up so it goes up in there just a little more. And that looks pretty fair. Okay, so once that's in where we want it to, we can hit Tab, and then I'm going to hit 7 on the numpad so we go straight down. Let's get to where we can see it. And now we can simply do our trick that we did before, which is Shift D, it turns white, left click, RZ90, and it should put it perfectly where we want it. Let's do it again. Shift D, left click, RZ90. Now it's under that one. We got one more to do. Shift D, left click, RZ90. Cool. And we have our feet duplicated. Okay, cool. So we're ready to rock. Shift A, and this time we're going to use a curve again, except this time we're going to use a circle. All right, so let's scale that in. And I'm going to come up here and turn off my pivot position as 3D cursor and take it back to individual origins. All right, cool. I'm going to drag this down like so, and then I'm going to scale it out. Something like that. And then I'm going to hit Tab to go into edit mode, and we'll take a look at our curve. Okay, we don't want to change any of the handles. We want this to remain round. So if we come back over to our controls, remember they're in this control panel, down to geometry, which may still be open from last time, down to bevel, under depth, hover over the number, hold down the shift key, left click and hold, and then move your mouse till it starts to thicken up. And then we want this to be whatever size you want. I think this looks pretty good right here. Now it looks like we are cutting into our curve there, so I'm going to hit tab and let's scale it just slightly. We don't want it to cut in there too much. We don't want any light to be able to show through in our model, so it definitely has to be in there slightly, but not too much. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's convert this to a mesh. We'll right click and convert to mesh. Now if we hit tab, we can see that it's a mesh. Okay, let's unwrap this real quick. I want to grab a seam all the way around the inside center here. So if we're in edge mode, I can grab one of these edges by hovering over it, hold down the Alt key, and then left click, and I'll select the entire ring. If we right click, we can mark that seam. Now we can arbitrarily put a line anywhere we want going the other direction crosswise. So I'm just going to hover right here, Alt, left click, right click to mark that seam. A to select the entire object, U to unwrap. And we see we get a pretty good unwrap over here. This is perfectly adequate for this project. Now if we hit tab, we're going to have to smooth this out like we've been doing. Come over here to Autosmooth, and you can see it kind of becomes faceted. If we right click and shade smooth, you see nothing happens. Again, our angle is at 30. If we just move it up slightly, we get it to smooth out, and that's what we want. All right, and I only went up 1 degree and it changed it, which is perfect. Okay, cool. Let's move on to the next step. Let's hit Alt A, and let's move up the stool. What we want is in the middle here to be some kind of a support that this is all welded to so it holds together. So let's hit Shift A, and this time I'm going to add a mesh cylinder. Okay, this is how our cylinder comes in. If we come down here, we get a control panel. We can left click it. The vertices are fine. If we come to the cap fill type and click, we can pick nothing. All right, cool. All right, so let's tab into edit mode, and then we can hit 1 on the top of our keyboard to go into vertex select mode, or you can select it right here, as you know. All right, I'm going to grab this entire edge loop around here of vertices by hitting Alt, left click. I'm going to hit ES to scale these in just a little bit, and then EZ just to bring it down in here just a little bit. We do the bottom here now. Alt to select that entire ring of vertices. ES to bring this in just a little bit. We're not going to see this bottom very much at all, but we do need to have something there just in case you can see it from some angle. Okay, this looks pretty good. Now we're going to mark the seams to unwrap. Let's just left click here. I'm going to grab this entire edge here by Alt left clicking. Let's Shift Alt left click this edge and right click and mark that seam. Now this circle part inside here needs to have at least 1 cut somewhere. So let's do that. Let's select it, right click, and mark seam. And then finally the bottom, we need this bottom edge. Alt, left click to get the entire ring. Right click, mark seam. And then finally we need 1 cut going down the side of the cylinder, so we can just select any one we want. Right click, mark seam. All right, if we hit A to select the entire object, U to unwrap, this is what our unwrap looks like. It looks pretty good, perfectly adequate for this project. All right, so let's move on. If we hit tab, let's do our smoothing trick here. Right click to shade smooth, and then auto smooth, and that looks pretty good. I'm gonna leave it at 30. All right, cool. I'm gonna hit tab, and then we're gonna scale and bring this down. I'm gonna move in just a little closer. I want to bring this up because remember, this is the part that these legs are welded to at the very top. Now that's way too fat, so let's keep on scaling. I want them to touch, and it's okay if even a little bit of it goes into this other geometry. Because again, as we turn our chair, we don't want to see any kind of a gap. Like there's a little bit of a gap there, so I'm going to scale this up just a little bit, just so it encompasses the whole thing. All right, cool. That looks pretty fair. So it doesn't really matter if this is here because we're not going to see that at all. You can see it kind of coming through the geometry, but it doesn't really matter. All right, so Alt A to deselect. Let's hit Tab to go into object mode. Okay, so we've got our little weldment there. All right, so the next thing that we're going to work on is going to be this plate that's going to cap the ends of these pipes. So if I hit Alt A, to deselect, Shift A, we're going to add a mesh cube. I'm going to back out a little bit so we can see what the heck's going on. I'm going to have to scale this cube down quite a bit. And let's bring this up here like this. Get in where we can see it. Okay, and I want to squish this cube down on the Z, so SZ. Let's bring that down. Somewhere like that, like, you know, the thickness of, say, a piece of sheet metal. All right, if we hit Tab into Edit mode, I want to be in Edge Select. I want to grab all these corners. Each one of these corners here. We'll have to grab this one from the back. And then once we have those, I want to use the bevel tool. So that's Control B, and then we'll just pull this in to where it bevels. Something like that probably looks okay. We'll get this bevel context menu down here. I want to clamp overlap, and then I want the segments. I'm going to kick this up to 8. Okay, and that gives us a nice rounded kind of beveled edge. All right, so let's hit Alt-A to deselect everything. Making sure that we're in Edge mode, we're going to select the entire border by hitting Alt, left click. I'm going to hold down Shift, Alt, left click, and get the bottom one. Right click, Mark Seam. And then we can pick any one of these wherever we want. I'm going to pick this one, right click, Mark Seam. Okay, so now if we hit A, U, Unwrap, this is what our Unwrap looks like over here. Hopefully you can see it pretty good. I'll open that up just a little more. This is what our Unwrap looks like. It looks perfectly adequate for this project. Okay, so then let's smooth it out. Tab into Object Mode, right click, Shade Smooth, and then let's come down here to Autosmooth. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to leave it at 30 degree angle. All right, so now let's move this down so that it caps the pipes. And makes them and hides the tips or the ends of the pipes. All right, now I'm going to grab this cylinder and I'm going to move it up. But you can see that the gizmo disappeared. It's down at the bottom. That's from when we had the 3D cursor selected as the pivot point. So if we right click, we can set the origin to geometry, and then we can actually now use the gizmo a little more accurately. Something like so. And I think I'm going to maybe scale it in just a little bit. And then I'm going to hit Control A to apply that scale. Whenever you scale something in object mode, you mess up its scale, and Control A allows you to set its scale, apply its scale. Okay, that looks pretty good. All right, so we're trucking right along. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to add in a kind of a, it's going to be like a hex bolt that we're going to attach these ends on. So I'm going to hit Alt-A, Shift-A, Mesh, Cylinder. Okay, so our cylinder looks pretty good, except that it has too many vertices. So I'm going to click the number, backspace, and hit the number 6, and enter. And now it'll be more of like a bolt. And so let's SZ to bring that down, something like that. And then we can scale it in a little more. Now, I know we're scaling in object mode. We'll fix that here in just a minute. Sometimes I scale in object, sometimes in edit. Let's keep scaling this down until it looks about right. Okay, and then let's tab into edit mode. And then I'm going to grab all of the edges here. I like to be in vertex mode for this kind of thing. Let's hit Alt, left click to get the entire top. We're going to hit ES to scale this in a bit, something like that. And then we're going to hit EZ and bring it straight down just a little ways. We don't have to bring it in very much. All right, now if we grab the bottom of it, Alt, left click, and then just ES a little bit. We don't need to even really see what's going on. You can see I just have a little bit there. Okay, cool. Let's unwrap this object. But before we do that, since we moved it around in object mode, let's tab into object mode, hit Control A, and let's apply its scale. If we hit tab to go back into edit mode, now we can unwrap. And as you know, we have to unwrap in edge mode. Let's grab the whole loop around the top, Alt, left click. Let's grab this loop in the center, Shift, Alt, left click. And then let's grab the bottom, Shift, Alt, left click as well. Right click and mark those seams. Now we need one on the inside here. Pick that one, right click, mark seam. And then we need one on the outside of this bolt. Let's just pick this one, right click, mark seam. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's see what it looks like in our unwrap. So if we hit A to select everything, U to unwrap, then this is the unwrap we get. That's perfectly adequate for this project, so I'm going to keep on trucking. All right, let's hit Tab to go into object mode, and then let's do our trick of right-click, shade smooth, and then let's auto smooth, and then I'm going to leave it at a 30. Some people may say that these look too sharp. You don't really notice this, especially after we add a little bit of edge wear and stuff like that, so it's not that big of a deal. And I'm trying to keep this as low polygon as possible. As you can see, right now we're only at 2700, so let's just try to keep it as low as we can. You could bevel stuff, you could add subdivision surface modifiers to all this, but you're going to really jack up your poly count. All right, so I'm going to bring this down just a little bit. Let's make sure it looks okay. We might want to scale it in just a little bit. Bring it down, and then we're scaling in object mode, so Control A and apply at scale. Okay, that looks pretty good.